All right, welcome to this episode of the Agile for Agilists podcast. I am your host with the most, Brad Nelson, and with me is your co-host, Drew Podwal.
The host with something. I love that today, by the way. You got me with that one.
Good. And today we are joined by Patty Aluskewicz, who is the founder of Agile Mindset Consulting. She is a Scrum Master career coach, Agile consultant, and professional educator. She's got over 15 years of experience. She assists businesses and their employees in building Agile and Scrum skills, which is what this podcast is about, and successfully implementing them into their teams. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. I'm very excited about today's topic. It's about learning organizations and the growth mindset and the ownership that we have within building our own learning organizations. And one of the things that I always like to start with when we talk about organizational change is that organizations are made of people. And so we're not trying to change an organization, we're trying to change people. And so on that note, hi, Patty.
Hello, I know people can't see me, but I'm sitting there nodding along right with you. I'm so excited to talk about this topic.
Awesome. Yeah. So right before this call, you were mentioning how you used to be in the academic field or industry. I'm not sure the right word for it.
Sure.
So I'd love to have you give our listeners just a little bit about your history in that.
Yeah. Well, that's an incredible way to put it, because a lot of times public school teachers and former public school teachers don't consider themselves that. But it is academic, very much so. So, cat's out of the bag. I am, and again, this was, a while ago. My first career was a public school teacher. I was a science teacher. I went into the middle school classroom very excited and passionate about sharing my love for science with 13 and 14-year-olds. I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed right out of my bachelor's degree in geology, and I found that they were not that excited about being there. So it was an interesting wake-up call for me. But in a lot of ways, it's mirrored so much of what I've experienced going into companies. Sometimes people are not excited about Agile coaches showing up or Scrum Masters showing up there because there's this nervousness that people are going to tell us, people meaning us, Agilists are going to tell everybody in front of them what they're doing wrong. And it was the same thing with my students. They're always afraid of that. But anyways, so I taught science for 9 years. After about a year or so, I realized that the command and control environment that I was creating in my classroom was not something that I was too excited about anymore. And I could tell it wasn't working. So I was researching other methods of teaching. And at the time, I didn't know what I was doing with Scrum and Agile because, again, this was 20 years ago. Who was doing it, right? Except for Silicon Valley. But I took myself out of the front of the classroom and I created a learning environment. And I helped coax them take charge of their own learning. And they relished in it. They loved it. Because I was no longer standing up at the front telling them what to do. They took ownership of what they were doing in my room. And I pushed it as far as I could. But obviously, it is a very command and control environment, and I'm sure we'll get into this later in the podcast. But I ultimately, as I said, kicked myself out of the public school system. And I went into business for myself, and I learned a lot about growing and scaling that business. And eventually, many years later, ended up using all of these skills to become a Scrum Master and Agile Coach. So all of that has served me well. But it's taken me some time to own that path because it's been a very different one than a lot of people that I come in contact with in the software development world.
I love that so much. There's so much of it that I love that you just kind of talk through. Drew and I love hearing where people come from because Agile coaches don't spring out of the ground from nothing. There's no Agile coach degree. We all started somewhere. And that's something that I think we always have to remember. I definitely have had confidence issues because my background is more in lean manufacturing and coming from the factory. And I was raised to believe that wasn't a desirable thing to be a factory worker. And I think a lot of people still feel that way. So I definitely know what it feels like to have some of that imposter syndrome because I don't have like a comp sci degree or anything like that. But I love the recognition as well of like the education industry and the command and control. I'm currently reading this book, Better Value, Sooner, Safer, Happier. And they talk about Dan Pink's Autonomy, Mastery, and Purpose.
One of my favorite authors in the world.
And the other thing that I love about our field in the business world is that we always steal stuff from other industries. So it almost makes sense to start somewhere else. So like Dan Pink's work is really Edward Dietschy's work, which is autonomy, competency, and relatedness. But the point they make in the book is that when we as Agile coaches go into organizations to implement Agile or to install this change, we're taking away people's autonomy. We're telling them, hey, this is what you have to do. Now they're working in a new way than they've never worked before. So we've removed that mastery. And then usually the purpose is the company wants to make more money, which is not a motivator for people.
Nope.
So we've taken away all three of their motivators, and now we expect them to want to engage.
Right. And what's so interesting that you just said was about we've taken away their autonomy. I never even thought of it that way. But the intent and purpose of the Scrum framework is to give teams more autonomy and self-management.
Yeah.
Yet our reputation precedes us that we're going to come in there and tell them what to do. Oh, dear.
Yeah,
I know, right?
How did we get here?
I was on a webinar the other day where Adam Weisbart was doing a build your own Scrum activity that he does, where he's got a mural board template, and on it are the different icons of the aspects of Scrum. And the activity is for your teams to self-determine their workflow by putting those objects onto the board. And, at first everybody tries to make it look like the Scrum loop, right? But then people start to realize like, okay, well, wait a minute. Backlog refinement doesn't happen outside of a sprint. It happens in the sprint. And so everybody winds up with these like monsters, but it's a great way of allowing teams to kind of self-explore and have some self-determination. The other thing I was thinking about, though, as you were talking, Patty, is I remember, and it's been a while, but when I took my CSPO from Dave Pryor with Leading Agile, he had all of the learning modules for the CSPO on a Kanban board, right? And he allowed us to vote on which ones we wanted to. And some of the things were movable, right? I think there were probably a couple of swim lanes or something. But for the ones that weren't specifically part of the class or a required part of the class, we could sequence them through voting from a priority perspective. And we, as a class, determined our own curriculum in that way. And I remember thinking like, oh man, the other people in this class, if they don't pick the things that I want, but we got all the interesting topics. But I love what you're talking about, right? Allowing our clients to step in and choose their own path. So when you're thinking about it in that approach, like where do you get started, right? So if you're coming into a company and you want them to have autonomy over their own curriculum, domain, transformation, whatever you want to call it, where do you get started at that?
Yeah, I think that, and I'm going to say something so cliche here because I feel like everybody says this. And it makes me wonder, like, why is do they really do this? You go into the organization and you just listen and ask questions. And I think there's, going back to the way we've trained people in school, it's like you have to produce something to be valuable. So it's so hard to go into an organization and just observe and pay attention and talk to people and ask people questions. Can you tell me about this? How is this working for you? And I mean, I don't sit by all the other Agile coaches in the world, but like, are they actually doing that, or are they going in and telling people what to do?
Yeah, that's a tough one to sit with. I was on an interview probably about a month ago at this point, and everything about the interview up until like the third round was really all about that, like patience and coaching, active listening, right? Partnering with your clients. But then in the end, what it turned out was what they really wanted was somebody to go in and be a consultant and tell. And that's a hard spot to sit at times. So, but Brad, I cut you off. What were you going to say?
No, I love that. Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say that's why at my company, we've been calling it a discovery-based approach, and that we're going to discover as we go what it is we need to do. And that all comes from one of our thought leaders in my company, Ken Rickard. He is a lean change management trainer. And so that's really the approach we've been taking, is we've been trying to use Agile to help organizations become more agile. And I think that's what it boils down to. When we think about traditional OCM, like ProSci, it's definitely much more waterfall approach to it. We have our starting point, we have our end point, let's move towards it. And that's not to say they aren't taking feedback throughout the way, but there's still, that feedback goes into how can we get back on track for the plan, right? And so that's really the difference. And so the thing that we definitely try to do is we do go in and we listen and we talk. We also believe in co-creation of solutions. If you're co-creating it, you're bought in. If I'm telling you what you're going to do, you're going to be resistant. It doesn't matter what it is. I'm resistant if you tell me I have to do something, even if it's something I believe in. And that's just how humans are. But the other thing is, like, what are the problems we're trying to solve? What are the problems you have? And then what are the things that we're doing to resolve those problems? And if I just take a shotgun approach of install this framework, not all the practices might be beneficial or resonate with you today. And so making it relevant, I think, is just like humanizing the whole process is the trick in my mind.
Right. And understanding that change makes people feel like they're losing control. Mm-hmm. And we've all experienced that so many times in our life, like what that feels like to feel like you're not in control. And imagine if you are in charge of a P&L or, you're in charge of a lot of money because like the success or failure of your portfolio is depending on you to make sure this software gets in the customer's hands. Like that's a lot of pressure. And like humanizing the fact that people are under that pressure. So it's not just about the team, right? It's not just about the developers. It's understanding the leaders are under this pressure too. So being able to have those human conversations with them as well and not being intimidated by them.
And it's also while delivery is happening, right? And like, so essentially what we're asking our customers to do is akin to, we go into the kitchen of one of the finest dining establishments in the United States, and we're trying to convert the entire kitchen from gas to electric, right? While we're right in the middle of dinner service, and we're going to go gluten-free at the same time. And we're going to change out everybody's knives and all of that while dinner is being served to all the guests throughout, Right. And the kitchen crew knows that they're being judged on the quality of their deliverable while this is happening. And so how do you work with stakeholders to help reset the expectations to recognize that, in order to go fast, you got to go slow a little bit?
That's the $1 million question. Right? Because they want the problems fixed. But the challenge is that you have to peel back all these layers of the onion to figure out what the root cause is. And some people don't want to look at that root cause because it's super disruptive to change that. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, like I said, I just feel like you have to have a lot of compassion for every single person in the organization. And the only way you can is if you get to know people on a human level.
Well, that's absolutely the truth. I really believe that to be good at what we do is to know people on the human level. We got to understand what their fears are. We got to understand what their wants and desires are, what they're motivated by. I was just thinking though, like one of the games that I love to play with teams early phase is, have you ever done the paper airplane game?
I don't think so.
Have you done it, Brett?
I've done Icebreaker with a paper airplane, but I don't think we called it that. So I'm not sure.
Okay, so this is a cool one, right? So you split your class into like 2 or 3 teams of 5, right? Then you demonstrate the folding of a paper airplane, right? So the paper airplane is folded much like any other paper airplane. And then you take a Sharpie marker and you put a serial number on one wing, and then you put the team logo on the other wing, which could literally be like the team's initials or whatever that is, right? And the acceptance criteria is that the paper airplane has to fly 12 feet across the room and pass between two chairs that are stacked on top of a table. And then you tell the teams that they can organize any way they want, and let's see how many quality paper airplanes each team can make. And then, you give them 5 minutes and they do that. Then you count how many paper airplanes have passed QA. And then each team gets another 5 minutes to do a retrospective. What ideas do we have to improve the quality and the output of the paper airplanes that we're making, right? Then you impose some rules upon them to mimic like work in progress restrictions and whatnot, and ask them to then qualify how did having work in progress limits impact your ability to achieve high quality and high output. And the reason why I bring that up is, well, one, that's like just an awesome game. And I love playing that with teams. And I still have not figured out how to play that virtually. But which is why I brought up the game Overcooked the other day, Brad, because if only Overcooked were like open source and could be played on the cloud, that would be a great way to do that. But nonetheless, like in thinking about like the question of how do we convince or influence stakeholders that they've got to accept that in order to go fast, they first have to go a little slow. What games or activities could we play with stakeholders to help them to kind of realize that point, right? Like, well, no, seriously, we have lots of games that we play at the team level, right? And at the product owner level. But what are the stakeholder games that, I haven't seen too many of them. I mean, I know there's like the lean budgeting game where you put out buckets that have like the name of features on them, and you give them a wallet with fake money and they can, fund in that way. But there's got to be an activity that we could think of, right? Certainly the three of us could think of something where we could use it as a way for stakeholders to realize that, sure, you're accepting a little bit of a hit in delivery right now, but, you're going to get it back later.
I guess my first thought is, can we get them to play the games in the first place?
Yeah, that's where my thought was too.
Because I'm like, it's hard to get them to even show up to a meeting, right? So how does coming to an event like that, how do you sell that to them, so to speak, that it's valuable?
Okay, I'm going to go deep on this one. This might be a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm going to throw it out there,
Sure.
right? Is that, I came up from the bottom, right? I was in the Navy for 5 years. I worked my way up from the bottom to where I am now. And I, like you just said, I want to have a greater ability and efficiency in influencing stakeholders, and getting time with them is a challenge. And my current paradigm and my current hypothesis, and a little bit of the gremlin on my shoulder that might be telling me I'm not good enough a little bit, is saying to me, well, Drew, you've never been an executive before, so why are they going to trust you? Right? They have no problem trusting me with their portfolio managers, with their program managers, with their developers, their testers. But how can we know what's really going on, right? We see the metrics. We, like you said, we're very people focused. We get to know what makes people tick, right? We know what's really going on, but yet we can't get stakeholders to open up their minds for a moment and give us the time and space to really illustrate how that's actually impacting them. And yeah, my current paradigm is a little bit of the I'm not good enough gremlin because I've never been that executive before. And that might just be why I'm not presenting myself in a way that helps them to figure that out. So that's a deep cut, deep admission that I just put on air.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. So, I mean, really what we're talking about is the difference between team level coaching and enterprise level coaching. And a lot of people really don't have experience with enterprise coaching. I would say I have a little. I definitely wouldn't say I have a lot. I have more than I think a lot of team coaches do. But that's a conversation we have a lot because we treat things differently. One of the things that I also believe in is I don't believe in a top-down or grassroots approach to change, I believe in both. I think you need both. I think you need a strong sponsor at the top saying this is important, and that's how you get stakeholders more engaged and sometimes forced, just like the teams are sometimes forced to take training. Right? That's the reality of things. But I also think there's the same approach that you take with the teams, with stakeholders is, what are your problems? What are your complaints? And like, let me explain to you how we're going to address those.
Yeah, I might be done enterprise coaching. Actually, I had an interesting call today with my performance coach who I speak to on a regular basis, who's really wonderful. And, she challenged me, like, because I have been an enterprise coach, and what you just said really was intriguing, and it made me think for a second, Brad. There are times where I've walked into the room at the executive level and everyone's been like, Drew, we're so glad you're here. Tell us what we should do, right? And then there have been times where it's like, I'm knocking on that door and nobody's opening up. And, what I'm realizing almost live on this call right now is like, the thing is, we get to pick and choose. I am at a point in my career, right, where I can pick and choose who I want to work with. I'm not at a point in my career financially where that's always an easy decision to make, but maybe it's just I want to partner with people who are, I know that I should be trying to help people to step into the learning mindset. And I'm going to throw this question out to you guys. Do you believe that there are just people out there who just cannot step into that kind of mindset?
There's a famous book, right, that talks about growth mindset versus fixed mindset. As a coach, right, you never want to say, well, I think there are people that I just can't help. Or I think there are people that that can't learn. But it's their choice. Whatever gremlin, we talk about gremlins, whatever gremlin's going on in their head, whatever conditioning that's happened over the course of their life, that influences what they do and say on a daily basis. So they have to be aware that they're making the choice not to change, not to grow, to think, this is it. This is all I can do.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about a lot, like with the Agile Manifesto, highly motivated people. That comes up a lot. It says, right, I'm going to paraphrase, so don't slaughter me, people.
Sure.
But basically, we need to organize teams around highly motivated individuals. It doesn't say your average person. It doesn't say casually motivated individuals. It doesn't say resistant individuals.
Or people that are just there to have a job because they need money.
Yeah, and that's where I think some of some of us struggle, is because the people that wrote these books and the people that wrote the manifesto and these sorts of things, they come from an environment that is very mature. Right? And when we think about it, like the Agile Manifesto, it describes a culture, but it doesn't tell you how to get there. And it's the same thing with like the Scrum Guide as well, right? It's very open to interpretation, minimally defined scripture type thing where everybody kind of implements it their own way. And the hard part is getting there. And so I think that I agree. There is ownership on yourself to want help, to want the change. However, that makes you feel very helpless to just end the discussion there. And so I always look at it as, well, I can always do more to be influential, to explain things in a different way, to get more buy-in, to, be more charismatic. I've studied so many different areas than just Agile when it comes to like body language. And I've done vocal lessons, and I've, looked at psychology and mirroring and how to get people to like you and all of these other things that aren't, just Agile techs, to try to be a better consultant at the end of the day.
But you're only half of the relationship though, right?
For sure.
The other party, whether it's one person, a team, an organization, they have to meet you halfway. You can't do all the work. And I think that's something that there's some level of acceptance there. At least that's my personal belief. Like, I want to do as much as I possibly can, but I cannot force people to change.
Yeah. I'm also a Stoic, so I definitely relate there. And I think you have to come to those terms to remain sane as an Agile coach.
I can't save everybody.
Right.
Let's go back to when you were teaching in classrooms, right? And when there was a student that, and like it was probably me, right? I was that student that didn't want to learn, that wasn't interested in the subject or the topic or the lesson or whatever that is. Like I know for me, there was stuff going on at home. There was stuff going on in my head that I didn't feel good about. And, you know, I felt better about getting attention from acting out than I did from, because I didn't think I could compete as an academic performer, but I could be the class clown and whatnot. So what approaches did you take when you were a student with those kinds of people to help that, like other than playing, was it Bob Dylan with Jodie Foster, right? Or Dangerous Minds, or what are the tricks, tips and tricks that you used back then?
Yeah, you know, this is all like such a loaded topic because there are so many pieces to this. I think that understanding that, to your point, when kids act out, there's something going on, right? It's not personal against me, right? It has to do with what's going on in their head or what's going on outside of the classroom. And not taking that into account, I'm not treating this person across from me as a human being. And this is the same thing that happens at companies. The same things, people, they're not doing well, or, you know, they're not delivering on time, or their work quality is suffering. And this is where you like get down with people and develop a personal relationship with them so they can feel they trust you. And then once you can break through that and you can have some honest conversations, then they start to see that you care and you want to help them. And then they start looking at you, the teacher, in a different way. And then they start trying. But the other piece of this, Drew, and one of the reasons why I ultimately had to leave public education, and this is something that, you know, like I work with a lot of transitioning teachers. I coach a lot of them. And, you know, when people ask teachers, why do you leave the profession? They always give the same surface level reasons, like the pay is bad, the parents are a pain in the butt, like all discipline problems, all of these things. But I'm like, this is surface level. What is the real problem? Because these occur in companies too, these problems. So what is the real reason I left? And I really had to sit and think about it. And it was, I was trying to box students into the same conformist way. Everybody's different. And I realized that we treat students as if they're products, that they have to be built to these exact specifications. And if I don't do it as a teacher, I get held accountable. I get in trouble, so to speak. And I'm just like, that's something that I can't control. Because to your point, there's all these other things and all these other factors that determine what a student can or cannot learn, what they're willing to learn, what they're interested in. And it's like, I can't control these things. And it's too much pressure on me to expect, because by the time they get to me in 8th grade, every single student has all of these gaps in their learning, things that they missed along the way. And it's like, I'm supposed to pile more on top of that. I'm supposed to teach them like how to balance chemical equations when they don't know their multiplication tables.
Tech debt.
How do they? This is what I'm saying. Like when I talk to teachers, I'm like, you don't understand. Like everything you dealt with in the public school system is exactly what goes on in corporate America on software development teams. Identical to the exact T and I dot.
That's wild.
It is wild. So it is tech debt. So what am I supposed to do with that? Everybody has all this different tech debt, and I have 125 people sitting in front of me. That becomes an impossible task on me as one person. And this is why teachers are leaving. Because people are not products, but we treat them like products.
So that, you said that before, and it got my wheels spinning in my head. I don't know if you guys heard it or not, but
it's a little squeaky, yeah.
Yeah, a little squeaky. So I was thinking about, all right, if students aren't the products, then are they the product owner, right? And if they're not, then who's the customer? I feel like it's an interesting conundrum where they're both maybe the product owner and the product, and maybe at that age, the end user are the parents, and that at a very specific point in maturity, it flip-flops where, but I do feel like in a healthy education system where, because I always describe an organization's ability to pass value through their value streams, right, as a product. And that the Agile Coach is the product owner for that product, right? It's their job to look at where the needs are to continue to improve the Agile capabilities of that as a product, right? And so in a healthy education system, students are crafting a product, and that product is their life. And that, much like in Dave Pryor's classroom, there are things that are mandatory and things that are optional from a learning perspective. There's lots of pathways to learn all of that stuff that are optional, but that we've got to put students and our clients, right, more in control of their own learning path. But then it gets back to this idea of like, how do you get them to step into that growth mindset?
But it starts when kids are very young. By the time they get to 5 or 6 or 7, they're forced to sit in a classroom and listen to somebody talk. And it only goes downhill from there. But I think we're at this point, and I felt like 20 years ago, I was at this point. What is the purpose? What is the intent of purpose of education? Because it used to be to memorize facts and take tests because we needed people to have knowledge. But at this point, we need people to solve complex problems, not memorize facts. You can look up facts on the internet. So, yes, there is some like reading, writing, arithmetic that's very important. Don't get me wrong, but like we need to focus on problem solving as opposed to sitting and listening to somebody talk and answering questions and like taking a test and getting 100.
So this is why I was really intrigued by the communities of practice aspect of what it is that you do, because I feel like setting up a community of practice or just a Friday lunch and learn that's optional for people to attend, right? There's going to be some people who will show up and will find value and will begin to excel and begin to, propagate those ideas and the things that they've learned in the community of practice and the lunch and learns elsewhere. And more people will start to show up, and that's when it really starts to get strength. But I also have you heard of Path to Agility yet? Brad, I know I've brought it up. I think you've heard of this, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Path to Agility, it feels a lot like what we're talking about here, right? So what Path to Agility is you go into a company with, they've got these cards that basically map to outcomes that they're looking to achieve. And then on the other side of those cards are the capabilities that they need to develop to be able to achieve that set of outcomes, right? And you work with your customer to then say, all right, you've identified that these are the top 3, outcomes that you're trying to achieve with this Agile transformation. And I wish I knew what the better thing to call it was, because that's
right. I'm with you on that one. It's like a dirty word
anymore, but and then they sequence those cards, and that's what determines their general lesson plan, their learning plan from a capabilities perspective. And it also shows the dependencies, right? Because there are certain prerequisites and dependencies that, all right, well, if you want to get this outcome, right, you also have got to do this capability that'll build this outcome, right, first, right? To really, and we don't have to do it that way. But if we don't do it that way, you're not going to get the full benefit of it. And then they make that determination on their own. We don't make that for them. And I know I'm probably butchering the explanation of it. It's a methodology that I've wanted to learn more about. I keep on saying that I'm going to learn more about it. And I promise you I will. It's just a matter of when. But I do like that approach. And I like the idea of establishing Scrum Master communities of practice, product owner communities of practice, QA communities of practice, and just create these learning opportunities that have the potential to intersect with somebody's day-to-day activities and growth. And maybe someday somebody shows up and is like, hey, I've been having this problem and I felt like this might be a great place to talk about it. And it's a great way to win hearts and minds.
Yeah, I think one of the maturity aspects or one of the things that builds into being a senior Scrum Master or Agile Coach is understanding that you can't just replicate what you've done before. Like I was fortunate to have an incredibly high-performing, successful team as my first team I was a Scrum Master for. And I learned so much, and I referenced that one team over and over and over again because they did so much great. And they were doing DevOps before DevOps was a word, like just phenomenal, perfect, high-performing team. Well, not perfect, but for my development and not having to rely on faith. Right? I don't believe this stuff works. I know this stuff works, which unfortunately a lot of other Scrum Masters and Agile coaches can't say as well. With that said, though, when I first left that company, I was like, hey, I can just do the same things. I can just reinstall the same behaviors and every team will end up being just like this team. And that's not the case. And I think that goes back to your comment, Patty, about the individuals. Like each student is an individual. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Drew. It's not necessarily mapping them the roles. It's what is the outcome? What is the thing that we are trying to accomplish? Whether it's in school, whether it's in a company, every company has their own outcomes. So that variable alone creates the potential for different approaches. And we all have different people, different history, different backgrounds, different clients, different customers. There's so many variables that we can't just say every single time you have to do this.
Sounds like a classroom to me.
Yeah.
It's like you have to teach this curriculum to 30 completely different humans in front of you, and they all have to do extremely well, right? And it's like, it's unrealistic. And every single class has a different personality. Some classes are very quiet. Some are very boisterous, right? And the teams are like that too. And that's why you have to come in with a different energy and a different approach and different techniques and pull out different tools from your toolkit. And you have to be willing to be flexible and realize that you have to make these decisions on the spot. And that's something you have to get comfortable with. And I learned that from being an 8th grade teacher. You show up and all this stuff happens and you have to stay calm and you have to just orchestrate the whole thing.
And I mentioned highly motivated individuals earlier. I think that's a little bit of a cop-out because most organizations aren't Google. They aren't Apple. They aren't Amazon. One, they don't need to move as fast as those companies, but they're not paying for those sorts of people. And that's not to say you can't have people that are Amazon, Apple, whatever level at your companies. You definitely can, and I've definitely seen them. But when we say, let's meet our clients where they're at, that's part of it.
Right. I've always said that I've never met a developer, right? You don't become a developer because you want to skate, right? Developers, in order to become a developer, it takes a lot of hard work and dedication, right? Developers just want to see that their code is getting pushed to production and being used by end users. So I don't totally agree with that statement, Brad. I think that, yes, I've definitely seen, and at the management level usually, where there are managers who want to be able to just armchair work with their teams. They don't specifically want to roll up their sleeves. But I yet to really meet developers who show up to work with the goal of hiding, under the table and going home at the end of the day and collecting a paycheck. But I also like Reed Hastings. The way that he describes it is talent density in his book. I'm looking behind me, but I'm not home right now. No Rules by Reed Hastings.
Yes.
Right? He talks about the number one metric that leadership should be looking at is building talent density within their teams, and that when they see people with low talent density, that and this is the part that I take a little issue with. I don't believe in just cutting off the whatever the phrase is, right? Trimming the fat.
You are the weakest link. Goodbye.
Yeah. I don't believe in that. I do what Reed would say is you don't have time to take on the responsibility of trying to convince somebody to step into the role of learning mindset, growth mindset, and that it's better to just get rid of them. And he talks about how, the first time he did that at Netflix, he was worried that the people who stayed were going to be upset because now they had to do double the work or triple the work. And the reality was that what wound up happening was by letting go everybody who didn't fit the persona for a high performer, it allowed the people with high talent density who remained to create these new neural pathways in the way that they worked that they couldn't before because these other people were the dead weight. I definitely am more of I want to roll up my sleeves and sit with the bad news bears just to make sure that they're not going to make it to the championship if they have better leadership and better support and better psychological safety. So,
yeah. Well, I will say I have seen people who I believe are just punching the clock as developers, and maybe they didn't start that way, right? Like that's probably fair, but I have a story. So with my very high performing team, we had this developer within our department when we went to a more rigid, safe approach to Agile. And a part of that is working within teams, right? Cross-functional teams. Now I had this one gentleman on my team in my department who was a phenomenal developer. Guy was like a genius. He built the connections from the store to the main servers before there was TCP/IP, like before that existed, which is insane if you know anything about networking. And they still called on him constantly to help with different things that he had programmed 10, 20, 30 years ago. The guy was amazing. However, he was not really good at collaborating. He needed to think through stuff. Like he was the type of guy that completely like re-engineered a computer down to assembly to better understand how it worked before he started programming. Like that's the type of person he is. And he got a lot of flack and people judged him a lot because he was not meeting this agile norm that we were trying to force him into. Now what I did, I had the fortune of working for a company with enough psychological safety where I gave him special assignments, right? Like, hey, here's this proof of concept that we need to look into before we can pitch it to the business and make it a reality. Or here's this defect that nobody can seem to solve, like go off and fix it. He was great at that sort of stuff. He was a very hard worker. He'd work overtime even because he was obsessed with solving the problems. Now, would you get rid of that guy because he's not a quote-unquote agilist?
No, I would find some people, or I would ask that person to hand select or hand hire whoever he wanted to be his team, right? And
But he doesn't want to work in a team, and you're forcing the team construct on him.
Right, but so he didn't want to work on a team. He doesn't want to lead. Like even if he had self-determination and full autonomy of shaping that team any way that they wanted to, that was still off the table.
I mean, he wasn't unsociable. He's a very sociable guy. But when he worked, he had noise-canceling headphones that he put on over earplugs because he needed complete silence. And he often worked before the shift and after the shift so that he wasn't disturbed.
So then I would use spikes, right? I would ask that a person like that to, as a failure experiment, to maybe instead of doing some of the research himself, right, to create a couple of spikes and give it to the team that's well over on the other side of the building, right? And at the end of the sprint, that team's response, like the acceptance criteria for those spikes is that they've got to do a demonstration of what they found for that guy. And maybe those spikes are for things that he's going to be working on in the future, right? I want to know how this database is set up, or I want to know, whatever it is, right? But I definitely don't think that you would fire a guy like that, right? Because the amount of knowledge that leaves the company when you fire somebody like that is tremendous. But I also think that you've got to figure out creative and constructive ways to, because that person's not going to be at the company forever, right? Like even if they could be they're going to die at some point, right? Like, and, maybe the gamble that you're running on a person like that is that the company's going to go out of business before this person dies, right? But you've got to come up with some sort of creative and constructive ways to help other people get the knowledge from that person, right? Not so that we could fire them, but so that we can create some cross functionality. Maybe the process of creating those kinds of spikes might help that person to realize that they can trust other developers more. And maybe after a quarter of working in that way, that person maybe is open to the idea of, hey, those people who I've been assigning spikes to, let's just make them be a part of my team.
Yeah. We can hypothesize all day. I'll throw a wrench in there. Okay. So all of his legacy experience was in different departments and teams. He moved to a new team and started when everyone else did because he wanted to work on something new, and he's just great talent. Yeah, we're going to let him do what he wants to do. So he didn't have legacy knowledge that the rest of the team didn't have.
Wait, he didn't have legacy knowledge that the rest of the team didn't have. So then what did he have that the rest of the team didn't have?
Just a different way of looking at work. And the intelligence, I would say, to solve incredibly, incredibly complex, convoluted, complicated problems. Okay.
I mean, you still don't get rid of somebody like that, but I still think that there's ways to try to get them to lean in some regard. Maybe you host a hackathon and, they're the ones that creates the problems that are looking to be solved or something like that once a quarter or something. I don't know. I mean, I've talked a lot. Patty, what do you think?
I was gonna say,
you're over there smiling.
No, I mean, it's tough. I hear what you're saying, Brad, because this person is a wealth of knowledge for the company and the team and the product, but they don't want to participate in Agile and all these Agile things that we're asking them to do because it's not their personality. So what do you do about that? Everybody, it's Agile is just for everybody else, and this person can just sit in the corner and do whatever they want. And I think that that's a tough spot for a Scrum Master to be in, as well as a coach. What do you do? But the idea is that we're a team. So somehow you have to kind of pull things together slowly, because if the person is working, regardless of how amazing they are, if they're working in the corner by themselves, they're a team of one. And we've got to work together and solve the problems together.
Are there dependencies that other teams had on this person solving problems, or was it just completely in a bubble?
In this instance, I mean, there were teams that this team didn't work with that he had that legacy knowledge for. And so sometimes he would be off for a day or two solving something for another department across the company. But as far as his current team and the teams that they interacted with, no.
Okay, so he was on a team even though he wasn't in the team, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I would take him out of the team first, and give him the space to do what he wants. And I would look for documenting the dependencies. I would still document the metrics from a flow perspective for things that he did, even if it was only at the epic level or something like that, or at the feature level. So you can create some sort of flow-based metric for how many boulders and rocks this person can work on. But if you've got somebody who's, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of ways to skin this cat.
I guess my big question is that okay? What message is that saying to the rest of the team? It is a quandary.
Well, but if you could build high talent, if you could take him out of the team, right? That's kind of like, you're not firing him like Reed Hastings would suggest. You're taking him out of the equation, all right? You're creating a walled garden around him where he can do the high value things for a period of time at least. And you work with the other teams and you focus on getting them up to high performance, and you make a decision after a few more lunar cycles at least, to figure out there's going to be some impact, right? There's definitely going to be some impact. And so you quantify the impact and you write it up as an impediment, and you let the customer say, here's how this guy is impeding your teams. Here's how he's been providing value. What do you want to do about this? you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So I will tell you, the other developers did resent
That's
that he didn't want to work in a team, and that he kind of got special treatment because of the way he worked. And I just want to say, Drew, you take an individual out, that's not Scrum. It's a cross-functional team of at least 3 people.
But it does breed resentment. Like going back to the people aspect of this, forget about the work, right? We're trying to get people to interact with each other. Like that's the whole intent and purpose. It does make people resentful, and it does cause other problems.
But what's the value? You've got to be able to measure the value, right? So the value of having a guy who makes other people resentful, who disrupts the total flow of the organization, against the value of having somebody who can solve complex problems and doesn't have legacy knowledge that can't be duplicated, right? He's got nothing other than his unique way of working on things that it seems to me those things can easily be replicated by creating high performing teams, So but again, it's not my decision. It's the customer's decision.
True.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're coming back around to kind of how we started this podcast. I'm not sure if we talked about it a lot, but ultimately the individual has to own their growth mindset.
Right.
They have to want to learn. They want to have to grow. They want to have to adapt. And this is something that I know Drew and we've touched on in the past, is like soft skills are so much more important than technical skills in today's age.
Yeah.
You have to be able to work in a team. You have to be able to work with people. You have to be able to talk to customers and users. And that's more important than being able to code at the end of the day.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I posted about some of these things on LinkedIn, and there's a lot, I obviously get a lot of support, but I will get some pushback saying, because I always bring back, like, we don't learn this stuff in school.
Mm-hmm.
We learned facts in school. We learned how to reproduce those facts. We learned how to take tests. We learned how to sit in our chairs, right? And then people come into companies and we expect them to behave completely differently, and they've never learned, especially in those formative years where your behaviors are solidifying. So anyway, the point is I've gotten some pushback. It's like, well, soft skills is not really the schools. It's the parents. It's the parents' responsibility to teach their kids all of these things. And it's like, well, A, is that true? Is that still true? Was it ever true? But B, so what if they're not?
So I feel like I don't share as much as Drew does about my family.
Sure.
So my son is incredibly gifted. Actually, both my kids are very gifted. They test very gifted. My son's the oldest, so we're going through it with him first. And so I've had these conversations. What's the outcome of school? Is it to learn?
Yeah.
Is it education? Because he tests gifted. He tests well above his grade. And he was recently diagnosed with ADHD, which I know Drew can relate to.
Yeah,
and
I got that.
You're taking this very intelligent kid, putting him in a very boring situation, and then you throw neurodivergence on top of it, and it's a recipe for failure. Now, we've homeschooled him most of his life, and the argument that public schools always give us is, well, he's not going to get those social interactions. He's not going to learn how to interact with people, which to me is the soft skills. So, like, I hear, like, they're talking on both sides of their mouth, I guess, is my complaint or my problem or my challenge.
This is something I thought about many years ago when cell phones became smartphones, and you would go into a restaurant and you would see full families in a restaurant where the kids were on their smartphones texting with one another. And I remember the older crowd was like very put off by that. That's so obnoxious to see kids at some other table, not at your table, right? Like, clutching their pearls, like that kid over, how dare that kid over there be on their cell phone? And it bothered me a little bit at first, right? But what I started to think about is evolutional change in the way that we communicate, right? And, it dawned on me that these kids are learning to communicate these days in far different ways than we are. Like the shorthand that they've got from a digital communication perspective, There is some toxicity in the messages that are being put out there on TikTok and what makes a person popular and whatever. But and I'm just going to ask you, Brad, your sons, they game, they like, they're on the internet. Do they create videos? Do they?
I mean, he's not as big into it, but yeah, he's done some of that stuff.
Okay. Like that's a form of social growth, right? Socialization that just can't be taught in school. It doesn't get taught in school, right?
Yeah.
It probably won't ever get taught in school, right? Like and it probably should, right? Like there probably should be classes about like, how do you create content for the internet in a way that's safe and effective. And like if only we were to give kids like a marketing, like a branding and marketing class in middle school, right? Could you imagine like what they'd be able to build by the time they got in high school from a brand perspective or whatever? And so, yeah, I mean, they might be lacking on some of the face-to-face social skills, but, and I'm going to say it, like, I haven't really left my house in 3 years, right? Like, I get in the car, I'm out in Montauk, Long Island right now at a family house. And, I'm probably going to go back in a couple of weeks and get into my apartment building. And we're going to continue to have this amazing podcast where I get to speak with really smart people on a regular basis. And I'm loving that. Like, I am really loving that. I do miss like, having sticky notes and whiteboards and dry erase stains on my finger. And, I miss Nerf gun fights and things like that. But I think that we've got to open up our definitions a bit for what we consider social behaviors. And, just because one doesn't fit the model for what our grandparents determined, or Dale Carnegie determined was, social behavior, right? Doesn't mean it's not valuable. I think what they're doing is incredibly valuable.
Right. And the other thing I want to add to that is, we all go into organizations. How many people are struggling with social skills and soft skills? And the majority of those people went through the public school system. So like,
especially
I
developers.
think there's just a big bunch of BS. And just like, it's not like you keep your kids in a closet and don't let them like interact with people, right? I mean, I think that it's very easy to judge that. But it's like
information.
Anyway.
Information is a tribal currency, right? Like I have information that I choose to exchange for other information. Maybe there's something in that kind of way of looking at things. Like you've mentioned it before, Brad. I forget exactly what you said when I was talking about the idea of defects or attacks on a team. And I think you talked about the currency, like coaching currency or something like that. But helping employees and managers and leaders and product managers start to recognize what is the social currency in this company as a way of moving a air quote transformation through its stages.
Yeah, definitely social currency, right? You have to make it in order to spend it.
Yeah.
There's something else that's kind of interesting, and I don't remember all the details. It's been a minute, but there's research that's done periodically that shows that generationally, humans are getting better at abstract thinking. Like we are becoming smarter as a race at abstract thinking than generations before us. And that I think goes back to how you were describing school, Patty, is it's more, I guess, defined, right? Like this is the knowledge you need to know. We're just as smart in that area as a human race, but the abstract is just growing exponentially because it needs to, and it's a new world, and we live in a new world.
Right. It's like we're still educating people for a world that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And if we have all these needs to have all these problem-solving skills and this abstract thinking, yet we're still putting kids in the classroom and forcing them to sit there and listen to somebody talk or, exercises in the book or whatever it is, it just doesn't suit what our world needs anymore. So why are we still doing it?
Well, and it's also the same correlation with like Carlotta Perez's work and Frederic Laloux's work, right, around societal change and organizational change
I have that
and technical
book.
revolutions.
It's sitting on my coffee table.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book, right? But like we are still using antiquated models of organizing people and communication patterns that were necessary pre-digital, right? Like the idea of silos and management and directors and VPs and all of that. We needed that in the 1900s because we didn't have Slack or shared drives or Google Docs or shared calendars and stuff like that, right? Like, you know, we needed this tiered, siloed way of organizing people. And that's slowing us down. It's absolutely slowing us down. And, you know, a lot of the customers, have you guys ever heard of the hot frog theory?
Is it the boiling the frog?
Yeah.
Turn it up a degree.
Yeah, if you put a frog in a cold pan and you put it on a stove and you heat it up slowly, the frog is going to die blissfully without realizing it's boiling, right? But if you drop a frog in boiling water, it hops away. And I think a lot of like the developers and project managers who are still like clinging to this way of working, right? They're a lot like that hot frog, that they're not realizing the friction that's going on around them by preventing the adoption of, you know.
And it takes so much more time and energy and money, right? Because time is money to keep that controlled, because it's like we're busting out of it. And it's like,
so that's the game. That's the game right there to play with the stakeholders. Is you come into work with a pot of boiling water and a frog.
We solved that problem.
Drop it in. Now I've got their attention.
Well,
now I've got everybody's attention.
Yes, you do.
On that note.
So on that note, yeah, we've been talking a good while. I could probably talk about this all night. So but we should probably wrap up for our listeners. Patty, is there anything we didn't discuss that you wanted to discuss, or any last thoughts you want to share with our listeners?
No, I think this was a great conversation. To your point, we can keep going all night. I know we kind of had some points to talk about, but this conversation just grew and changed so organically. It was really cool. Great experience.
That's awesome. How we roll.
It is. Yep,
we're agile.
Yeah. You know what I'm thinking here, Brad, is we have it's a challenge for us, right, to come up with the titles for episodes, and it's a challenge for us to come up with the descriptions for each episode.
Yeah.
I think this one is going to be near impossible for us to come up.
I'm like, are you putting that monkey on my back?
Yeah, and we always forget links.
Sure.
So we remembered links 2 episodes ago. We forgot it in the last, so we're going to have to go fix that. So yeah, we're learning as we go.
Sure. No problem. Yeah. Well, let me know what you come up with. I always like to think outside the box, so come up with something cool.
I think
that's it. Thinking outside the box, right there. Boom.
Yeah.
Sold.
Man, I'm a genius.
And the clickbait title will be "Listen to this episode, or Drew will boil a frog."
There we go. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Patty. It's been a pleasure. As always, thank you, Drew. You're a fantastic partner. And next 2 episodes will probably just be Drew, because I'll be out. I'll be traveling. Yep. So I'll be at Agile International Conference, which will already be done by the time people hear this episode. So can't promote it. But yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Fun.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.